Hey there, it's Jamie Anderson, and I have recently released my third book, Drive All Day. It's a collection of stories from a musician who has toured and taught for over 30 years. I'll include links to where you can purchase the book somewhere in this video or perhaps underneath. I'd like to read you one of the chapters. This one is called These Songs Are So Sad. I'd only been teaching a few years when I got my first call from the Chinese embassy in Ottawa to teach one of the kids living there. They must have been happy with my work because later 2 more students came. The first student was an 8-year-old with a round face and a shy smile whose name was Thomas. Since his family came straight from China, I doubted that was his given name, but one chosen so we Canadians could pronounce it. As I saw with later students, it was a common thing to do. A couple of months into his lessons, I asked him his Chinese name. In a quiet voice, he murmured, Li Wei. I asked which name he preferred, and he answered Li. So that's what I called him. He was a good student, and his English was great, although he sometimes didn't get colloquialisms. I'd say something like, "Wasn't that song a blast?" And he'd respond with a puzzled expression, probably wondering what an explosion had to do with playing music. As an American, I'm a dual citizen. I sometimes talk too fast for someone not a native speaker. I tried to remember to slow down. He never said if something confused him. He'd wait for me to ask. Fortunately, with music lessons, sometimes all I had to do was demonstrate and ask, "Do you understand?" One day, as Lee was taking his lesson in my home studio, he heard someone talking from downstairs. He stopped playing and looked at me, tilting his head to one side. "That's Pat," I explained. "Is that your roommate?" he asked. "No, my wife." "Oh," he answered calmly. "My mother said there are some men who like men." That was all the discussion we had. Frere Jacques was in the book I used to teach him. After playing the melody, he smiled and said, "I know this song. I learned it in China." I asked if he wanted to sing it, and he nodded. Too shy to sing it that day, he said he'd try the following week. When he showed up then, his mother had written the words in his book in Chinese characters. "Is it the story of a boy sleeping?" I asked. "No, in China it's a song about a white tiger." Timidly, he strummed the chords and sang in Mandarin in a charming, off-key little boy voice. He practiced the song a lot in the following weeks and performed it at the student recital, his proud parents in the audience. I hated to lose Lee when his family went back to Beijing. In his place came Helen. A slender girl of 11, she dragged in a heavy electric guitar that was almost her size. Another good student, she was curious about the songs in the book, mostly older folk songs and classical pieces. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot was labeled African American Spiritual. She asked about both phrases. I started with spiritual. She nodded at my bumbled explanation as though believing in something you can't see made a lot of sense. It was easier to explain African American because she knew of Africa and also the U.S. I told her that songs like this gave great hope to slaves years ago because they were dreaming of a better place. She got quiet and after a pause said, "That is so sad. It's good to know there are no slaves anymore." I responded that there were still slaves, very often women. She shook her head and we went on to the next song. Another time she was playing House of the Rising Sun and wanted to know if it was a true story. I told her I didn't know. The book only had one verse, so she asked, "What is it about?" How do you describe something like that to a Chinese kid? I struggled with whether to gloss over the story and say simply that it was about a very sad woman. Or I could go with the version by the Animals, where the main character is a man, a drunk, and a gambler. I started with a vague description, but she had more questions, so I said, it was about a woman who made a living the only way she could and hoped that her daughter would not have to do the same. Helen solemnly nodded. Many of the folk songs in that book were there because they were in the public domain, and the publisher didn't have to pay to license them. Most are songs that native English speakers hear all their lives and never really listen to the words. To a girl from China, they were unbearably sad. Toward the end of her lessons with me, she was working her way through a book of Beatles songs. She asked if Eleanor Rigby was a real person. Perhaps. The Beatles got the name from a headstone. Get Back puzzled her, so she asked what it was about. How could I explain a song where a transgender person was a main character? She nodded but knitted her eyebrows together. I quickly started talking about Tucson since it's mentioned in the song and I used to live there. She admitted that she didn't know many of the songs beforehand. She enjoyed learning them though, and for a teacher who needed songs safe for a kid, they were a relief. No pesky words like libido to explain, or worse yet, songs with 4-letter words. Fortunately, most gangster rap is impossible on an acoustic guitar. She found the lyrics to a lot of the Beatles songs bewildering. One night she asked what song she'd learn next, and I told her, Help. She thought for a minute and answered, Sounds sinister. I couldn't help but laugh as I explained that it had nothing to do with the person being stabbed or anything, that it was from a man looking for love. Okay, she said in that tone reserved for adults who are feeding her a line. When I added another song, Here, There, and Everywhere, she dryly replied, Sounds like Dr. Seuss. We decided it was a little like Green Eggs and Ham. When I explained it was another love song, she raised her eyebrows. Maybe she thought men in Western culture were really weird. I was inclined to agree. Who the hell talks like Dr. Seuss when trying to impress his sweetheart? My third Chinese student came to me while Helen was still taking lessons. Tim had an amiable way, always answering my greeting with a gentle hello. When he first arrived for lessons, his father looked to Tim to translate because he didn't speak English and I didn't know his language. A few weeks into lessons, we discovered that communicating was much easier with emails because he could use a translation program. As it is with all programs like that, sometimes the phrasing was awkward, but I usually understood him and appreciated his extra effort. In one of his last emails, he wrote, Thank you again for your contribution to Tim. No matter where we are in the future, we will remember you here. The memory is very good, but the current situation cannot say goodbye to you face to face. Tim stopped taking lessons during the pandemic when I was only teaching online. I wished I could have said goodbye in person too. So that's my chapter. These songs are so sad. And if you're interested in my book Drive All Day, look for the links either in this video or below, and you can buy it too. Thanks for listening.